Now, let me start by saying that I'm usually a laid-back kind of guy. Always have been. But my ex-wife, she had a different perspective on our marriage. She seemed to treat it more like a lucid question rather than a true commitment. Quite a character, I tell you. It all began when I discovered that my dear spouse was having an affair with a fellow member from our fancy country club. Can you believe it? Our own damn country club, where we spent countless Sundays playing golf and enduring those never-ending brunches. And guess who it was? None other than Frank, the husband of that obnoxious duo, Frank and Darla. Quite the soap opera, isn't it? Now, how did I uncover this secret? Well, it wasn't through some sneaky private investigator or a sudden burst of supernatural intuition. It was all thanks to her own incompetence. She had foolishly stored revealing photos and lovely emails in a secret email account on her phone, thinking she had covered her tracks. She believed she was the modern-day Mata Hari, but boy, was she wrong. When I confronted her, she played the innocent card, denying everything until I laid my cards on the table. The photos, the emails. It was like witnessing a fragile porcelain doll shatter into pieces. All her facade crumbled, and she begged for my forgiveness. Quite the performance worthy of an Oscar, but I wasn't buying any tickets to that show. I made it clear to her that she was only sorry because she got caught, not because she genuinely regretted her actions. Her face turned pale as white as a sheep. She asked me what my intentions were. I responded with a satisfying silence. It felt like being in a battle and you wouldn't give away your strategies to the enemy, right? That's exactly how I saw it. I had declared a silent war that lasted a week. I acted as if everything was normal while she was a bundle of nerves, stumbling over her words and making more mistakes than a beginner juggler. Behind the scenes, I remained calm and collected. Setting my plan into motion, I initiated the process of filing for divorce and had my lawyer working on the necessary details. I hadn't revealed this little piece of information to her yet, keeping my cards close to my chest. Then the perfect opportunity presented itself. The quarterly banquet at the country club. Frank, the club president, and his irritating wife Darla were always by his side. I volunteered to give a speech at the event. I could practically hear my wife's heart pounding in her chest when I informed her. It was like watching a deer caught in the headlights, fear evident in her eyes. The day arrived and there we were, dressed up to the nines, sitting among the town's elite. As I stood up to take the stage, I noticed my wife's knuckles turning white, clutching the tablecloth as if it was her lifeline. I began my speech by discussing the importance of taking control of one's life and not allowing circumstances beyond our control to shape or define us. Talk about irony, huh? The highlight of my speech involved distributing envelopes to everyone in the room with strict instructions to wait for my signal before opening them. The tension in the air was so thick you could practically slice it with a knife. All eyes anxiously shifted between the envelopes and me. My wife's expression resembled someone who had just encountered a ghost. Beads of sweat trickled down her forehead as she tightly held onto her unopened envelope while my speech reached its conclusion. Finally, I gave the command. The room fell into a hushed silence as members of the country club tore open their envelopes and then chaos erupted. The envelopes contained the very pictures and emails I had discovered, exposing Frank's betrayal for all to see. My wife's deceit was laid bare and poor Darla was left in a state of shock, witnessing her husband's treachery. All the skeletons that had been hiding in the closet were now dancing under the harsh spotlight. Frank appeared as if he had just swallowed a bug, his face turning a sickly shade of green. As for Darla, she stared at the photos as if they were some extraterrestrial artifact, her face transitioning from pale to flaming red. In my wife, well, she found herself right in the eye of the storm, her wide eyes reflecting pure horror. The aftermath was just as chaotic as you can imagine. Frank, the once beloved club president, was swiftly stripped of his title, faster than a race car, zooming down a straightway in the span of a single evening. He went from being the top dog to the town's biggest outcast. Darla was inconsolable, her sobs echoing through the hall. The realization that her husband had been playing her for a fool hit her harder than a ton of bricks. Now let's talk about my wife. She was quite the social butterfly, always surrounded by her circles. But all of that came crashing down in an instant. It was like witnessing a queen being dethroned. The news spread like wildfire throughout our town, and she became known as the Home. The shame and humiliation were evident on her face. And I have to admit, I took quite a bit of satisfaction in that. Okay, let's be honest. I reveled in it. But the icing on the cake was when I announced my resignation from the club. Can you imagine? Not only did they lose their president, but they were also losing a long-standing member like myself. The room fell into a heavy silence. So quiet you could hear a pin drop. My wife looked at me with a mix of shock, betrayal, and desperation. but I had cut all ties with the club and with her. I packed up my life, took my online business, and relocated to a new city. It was a fresh start. Leaving behind all the drama, lies, and heartache, my wife was left to face the consequences of her choices. And as for Frank, well, let's just say he had his own battles to fight. As for me, I finally gained my freedom from a toxic relationship in a suffocating town. In the end, you could say that my revenge was also satisfying, like indulging in a warm chocolate souffle fresh out of the oven. There's something satisfying about reclaiming control of your life and standing up for yourself. Maybe some would call it petty or harsh. But in that moment, I felt empowered and back in the driver's seat. No regrets, just valuable lessons learned in a future filled with endless possibilities. Now let's catch up on what's happened 1 year later. Time for an update on everyone's lives. Let's start with the aftermath of my little surprise at the country club. Surprisingly, the divorce proceedings went smoother than anticipated. Thankfully, I had already established my online business before I met my wife, so I retained full ownership. She ended up with just a monthly maintenance payment, which, thanks to the success of my business, was more than manageable. Let's call it the price of pursuing love. As for my ex-wife, well, her attempts to find employment in a town where her reputation was tarnished didn't pan out. It seems being labeled the town homewrecker isn't exactly a desirable quality for potential employers. Eventually, she made the decision to pack up and leave, perhaps in search of greener pastures where judgment was less harsh. And as for Frank, oh boy, he got the short end of the stick. His divorce was far from favorable, resulting in him losing a significant portion of his business to dog. It just goes to show that old saying is true. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Frank had to start over and rebuild everything from scratch. It's pretty wild how the order and timing of events can completely alter the trajectory of your life, huh? Now let's move on to the more enjoyable part of this update, shall we? I've started dating this amazing woman who brings a breath of fresh air into my life compared to my ex-wife. But let me tell you, marriage is the last thing on my mind. Milk. Been there, done that. Got the souvenir. Right now, I'm perfectly content with dating, growing my business, and embracing the fun aspects of life. In fact, I've reignited my passion for playing the piano, something I had set aside during my marriage. It's incredible what you can achieve when you're not constantly tiptoeing through the minefield of matrimony. My current dream is to form an 80 Seconds retro wave band just for the sheer joy of it. Who knows? Maybe I'll even share some of our tracks here someday. So there you have it, folks. My life has taken a complete 180-degree turn, but I've emerged on the other side as a better and happier person with a renewed lease on life. Story 3. Always remember